Let's get to the story of the day. Story number 1. To set the stage for this story, I have pulmonary fibrosis. This is a fatal ailment that has weakened my lungs, reducing my lung capacity to 40%. I frequently get shortness of breath and hypoxemia. I've had the following 4 times in the previous 2 weeks under similar circumstances. The case I'll mention here, though, is the one with the most deep dream experience. I fell asleep and began dreaming on the night in question. Things took a pretty dark turn within a few minutes. I'm suffocating in my fantasy before I realize it. In reality, my nose was nearly entirely clogged. My mouth did not open. As a result, I was choking. I couldn't tell I was experiencing an issue because it started as a dream. I'd included suffocation in my nightmare. Meanwhile, I'm having a hard time internally. I was attempting to signal the dream people that I needed assistance since I was having difficulty breathing. The most noticeable feature of the dream side of the experience was that the more my body shut down physiologically, the more color methodically drained out of the dream landscape until I realized it had all gone an ashen gray tint. My thinking process also slowed substantially till I couldn't think at all. This all happened in what felt like 2 minutes. Everything in the dream literally froze in time, like a gray photograph that felt as lifeless and dead as I did. Dying was both pleasantly brief and horrifying. I became aware of a sudden, pleasant impulse to gaze upwards toward the sky. The only object that had any color was the sky. It was a lovely, deep blue. 4 things happened the minute I lifted my gaze skyward. I got conscious and was able to think clearly for the first time. I felt revitalized. The lifeless dream's landscape disappeared, and like a light bulb, my human identity and ego switched off, freeing me to totally embrace myself as spirit. The tunnel had formed over my head, luring me in at breakneck speed. The only thing I could think about was the light and God. As I drove, I kept chanting, God, 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 to keep my thoughts focused. The tunnel walls were completely dark, with a lovely gold light pulsing through and around it. A magnificent golden light shone at the end of the tunnel. As I began my journey through the tunnel, I realized that my body was nearing the end of its life. Despite the fact that I was still acutely aware of my body's predicament, I vowed to see the tunnel through to the conclusion. Because I'd been through similar scenario twice in the previous week, I felt like an old pro in the tunnel. It occurred to me that there were only 2 reasons I would be going through it. Either I was already dead, or the body was in the process of dying and was not long for the world. In any case, I felt compelled to complete the journey as quickly as possible since I didn't want to waste time hovering over Earth's astral realm. I lost awareness of my body as I traveled farther into the astral plane. In the final moments of the dream, I felt nothing but dread. In the tube, though, I felt the polar opposite. I was pleased and joyful. The flight via the tunnel was completely nice in my opinion. I had a hazy awareness of my body while I flailed around in my bedroom. I concluded that it was essentially a husk and that I should disregard it. I hoped it would quit fighting so I could be free. After all, I wasn't having any difficulties. I didn't need to breathe because it was a problem for the body, not me. The further I got into the tunnel, the clearer my senses and brain processes were until they were completely clear at the conclusion. I had a strong feeling that I was finally returning home. I half expected to glide through the light and out the other side. Instead, I was abruptly halted just as I was about to enter it. It was a massive wall of golden light that appeared to be 500 feet tall and as wide. It was impossible to ignore because everything else was pure darkness. It was the vacuum that I recognized. This was the point of no return. I knew that if I passed over the curtain, the body would perish instantly. There was no turning back now. I was still attached to it for the time being. I recall thinking that it would be a shame to give up an otherwise slightly serviceable body unilaterally when there is no compelling cause to do so. Nonetheless, I desired to pass through the curtain in the worst way conceivable. From the other side, I could experience an almost indescribable sense of goodwill and delight. I also experienced a big wave of emotion, which confirmed to me that the spirit realm is a highly active place. Many kind individuals seemed to be just beyond the curtain. The majority of my feelings were beyond words. However, I thought that by leaving the world early, I would not only be shrinking my duty to this form, but I would also be offending God. To do so struck me as the height of recklessness. I opted to return to the world, as terrible as it was to leave the light. I awoke for 10 seconds before falling back asleep. I found myself in the same situation once more. My nose was still blocked, and I hadn't gotten out of bed long enough to clear my airway. This time, I looked up at the sky and found myself rocketing through the tunnel. The trip, as far as I could tell, took 10 seconds. I stayed at the wall of light for a little longer this time. Even though I left again, I was frustrated because I couldn't cross across yet. When I awoke this time, I made sure to clear my airway before getting up to reflect on all that had happened in the preceding week. I've experienced the full spectrum of feelings, from moroseness and depression as a result of not being able to cross over to immense joy that I finally know what happens to us when we die. I was informed a few days ago that I would be going through this experience right now. I had entirely overcome my dread of death. Indeed, I eagerly await the day when my turn comes. I was browsing Pinterest and kept coming across a repeated encouragement card that said, "It's worth it. Your patience will be rewarded." It was the one thing that kept repeating itself no matter how far down the list I scrolled. It serves to comfort me that, while disappointing, I made the right decision. I glance at it frequently to remind me of why I returned. Story number 2. 2 near-death experiences, both involving visual vision of earthly occurrences remote from the body. I'm 17, and I'm sitting in a classroom on a warm fall afternoon, listening to the teacher complete his presentation. I'm also suffering from excruciating menstrual pains. I've fainted a few times as a result of these, and I'm waiting for class to end so I can get up and go to the nurse's office. There are only a few minutes till the class ends, and if I can hold on, but I can't. I feel myself faint, but unlike previous faints, this time I fall off my seat and hit the side of my skull on the metal rim of a desk in the row next to me. The next thing I know, I'm being jerked out of my body from the back, as if someone had snatched my soul or consciousness. Who I am. In other words, from the back of my neck. I find myself outside the school building, across the street from it, looking at it from what appears to be a position a dozen feet up in the air and somewhat to the left of the front of the school. I can see the classroom's second-story window from where I was. But I don't question what happened or why I've ended up here. Where I am. I'm passive but comfortable, and I'm acutely aware of the colors and details of the typical scene before me. Unlike a dream, this landscape depicts the type of day it was before I fainted. Sunny, blue skies, midday, and location. This was one of the reasons I'll never be persuaded it was all a dream. The colors are very vibrant, and the feeling of being completely aware of the day and scenery is all-encompassing. I take in the entire situation, not just what is in front of me, but also what is surrounding me and behind me. The class change bell rings, and I notice students walking from one of the outlet school buildings to the main building. Later, I notice that when I focus on these students, I do not recognize them with the same sense of recognition that I had in ordinary awareness. Instead, a part of me, my vision, I believe, telescopes right up to them, while the rest of me remains at the same vantage point in the air. I'm aware of what each pupil I focus on is thinking and feeling. In fact, I sense what it's like to be that person. But I do treat this information in the same way that I would in regular consciousness. I mean, if someone had approached me at that age and said, "You'll have this ability to know what someone else is thinking or feeling," I would have been delighted, even mischievous. But for whatever reason, I am now passive and at peace with what is going on, and I have no urge to exploit or manipulate any circumstance. Then I'm pushed back into the second-story window, pulled in with a swoosh through the screen, at which point I lose my spirit feeling and black out. I regain normal consciousness while resting on the floor. I feel frigid, odd, and slow, as if I've been out of it for a long time, even though I only fell a minute or two ago. My body feels heavy and sluggish to me. The bell had rung, and some students were streaming out, some of them gazing at me as they walked away, and a few were snickering. Later I learned that some of them thought I fainted due to the heat in the room. My teacher and one or two of my friends were pulling me to my feet and asking how I'm doing. One of them walks me to the nurse's office. Even after all these years, what strikes me as so real about this experience is its warmth and calm, as well as the vibrant colors and crisp details of a scene that I would normally take for granted. There were no spiritual presences, though I have felt them before. There were no glaring lights or tunnels. However, I was able to maintain a clear, peaceful awareness without any effort on my behalf. My second OBE felt very similar to my first. During a difficult labor, I stopped breathing. The anesthesiologist placed a gas mask over my face, and I lost consciousness. I'm not sure when it happened, but I found myself outside the hospital during my delivery's afternoon, observing the traffic around the hospital, aware of intersections and traffic, the partly cloudy sky, pedestrians walking into the hospital, every detail as clear as a bell, and the same peaceful feeling. This OBE, however, appears to be much shorter than the previous. I'm not sure how I know this to this day, but I do. Then I'm back in the delivery room, having just delivered a healthy baby boy. Story number 3. Mine happened when I was 20 years old in 1953. I was expecting a child. I was close to death after 5 hours on the delivery table. I needed blood, but there was none available in my little town. At that point, the doctor decided to transport me in an ambulance to a hospital in Nashville, which was 25 miles away. It was close to midnight. The previous ambulances were heavy-duty machines. When I died, my husband was frightened to be that near to me, so my mother climbed in next to me. When the NDE began, while they were deciding whether to send me, the doctor assumed I'd gone into a coma because I was listening to every word. With everything going on, I could see his feet and that his shoelaces were not fastened, and that he had no socks on when the funeral director arrived. He was also the ambulance driver. That bothered me since I was concerned he would trip and fall. They had to wheel me past the waiting area, and I could hear everything that was said. My mother-in-law kept saying to me, "She's no longer alive. Take a look at her eyes have rolled back into her skull." I couldn't see anything at the time. It was pitch black. I was hovering between the top and my body when they put me in the ambulance. I could evidently hear myself moaning, and all the while I was thinking, "I wish you would be quiet." It was as if my body was someone else's and I saw it as a distraction, and all I wanted was for it to be quiet. I could hear my mother speaking to my body and promising it that would be there shortly. I recall seeing railroad tracks ahead and thinking to myself that the ambulance should slow down. Although I was not in agony, my body was nevertheless creating a racket. They were waiting for me when we arrived, and 5 men rolled me into the elevator and then straight into the delivery room. At this point, I went straight to the ceiling and watched it like if it were TV. I felt so good and so, well, tranquil would be a close second. I had no interest in either the corpse or the baby. I didn't notice or think about the folks who had followed me into the waiting area. I was looking down while hovering in the room. Then all of a sudden, I was moving quickly backward and upward. I was suddenly moving forward without even realizing it. I didn't think of it as a tunnel, but it was dark and there was a beautiful white light ahead, and I needed to get there quickly. A whirling noise was the sole sound. The next day, I awoke in critical care, with the doctor sitting near my bed. I was so pleased that I wanted to tell him about my fantastic experience, but all he did was smile, touch my hand, and begin telling me about my baby. He claimed he wanted to prepare me for the next time I saw him. He'd been in the delivery canal for so long that his head had compressed to a point on top. He also expressed concern about possible brain injury. I had been in labor for a week before all this started. He was discovered to have an IQ of 160. He was born on the Sunday after Easter and died on the same day 25 years later in a plane disaster in Alaska, where he was a bush pilot. Before he died, he had multiple close calls in various ways. I still wanted to tell everyone I came into contact with about this amazing event. Until that happened, it was me, not the baby, who suffered brain damage. So for years before meeting Dr. Moody, I learned to keep my lips shut. I've found that there's no such thing as death, only transfer to a higher plane of consciousness. When my only son was killed, that saved my life. I wept for myself and everyone who loved him, but I knew he felt no pain or misery. Despite the fact that he had a daughter 2 weeks after his death, I simply hoped he could have seen her. And then I realized he had.